But the goal of this presentation today is just to show you, Gennaro, that this old idea, so what you were interested in your previous life in the 90s, so dynamic semantics, can still be of some use to solve some of the problems that I hope you are interested now. And then, so the final word, so I really would like to thank you for your contagious passion for linguistic research. And for me, actually, Gennaro was the reason why eventually I decided to do semantics rather than mathematical logic, because he really managed to convince me that even in the most intricate data, the most difficult empirical data, there was some logicality to be found. So thank you. Yeah, that's, so he tried as a supervisor to convince me to add some rhetorics to my, but you didn't manage that, I'm sorry, but I will do my best. All right, so I have to, now let's start with,
Push the button.
all right, can you hear me? Okay, so the point of departure of today's talk is an observation, the following observation. Can you hear me? The number of constructions in various languages display different behavior in the scope of epistemic and deontic models. The first example is from Romanian epistemic determiner Vrun, which has been studied by Anna Maria, who's there. In her dissertation and in subsequent work. And what she observed is that Vrun is licensed under epistemics, but is not licensed under deontics. Second case studies, Slovenian concessive scalar particle, studied by Luca, also here in the audience, in his MIT dissertation. These are the other way around. They are licensed under deontics, but are not licensed under epistemics. Wait, I have to move there, otherwise. No, wait. Oh. Because otherwise I don't see what.
Yeah, Maria, if you don't mind holding the microphone.
Oh, no, that's fine. No, so that's a bit better. All right, thank you.
Also look at the videos
But I have to move the slides. Right. So, Slovenian concessive scalar particle the other way around. They are licensed under deontics, not licensed under epistemics. Third set of data come from the famous Irgendime, made famous by, because Kratzer and Shimoyama, they talked about it in their seminar paper on alternative semantics. And more recently, it has been observed to give rise then to different inferences under epistemic and deontic model. Now, this apparently diverse set of observation. So although there seems to be diverse set of observation, there seems to be, there was a curious commonality in the sort of explanation that have been proposed for this data. Namely, so all these three recent approaches relied on one assumption, more or less implicit, on the following assumption, that deontic and epistemic models differ in the way they license free choice inferences. So this assumption, which I will call the modal variability hypothesis, is, say, the object of scrutiny of this talk today. Let me say first something about free choice, even though for this audience it's probably not needed. Now, okay, I will hear the formula, so I will assume. So free choice inferences are inferences as illustrated in 1, so that occur when we have a disjunction of an existential in the scope of a model. And then 2 and 3 illustrate deontic free choice inference and epistemic free choice inference, respectively. And 3 is from Edith Zimmermann, also in the audience. So you may go to the beach or to the cinema. This is an example from Hans Kamp. You normally conclude you may go to the beach and you may go to the cinema. Deontic free choice, epistemic free choice. Mr. X might be in Victoria or in Brixton. You normally conclude Mr. X might be in Victoria and Mr. X might be in Brixton. Now, what is this modal variability hypothesis that we want to investigate here? So it's the hypothesis that epistemics and deontics have a different free choice potential. More particularly, so epistemic free choice is a well-behaved pragmatic inference that doesn't penetrate computational or semantic value. Whereas deontic free choice is more able to penetrate into the compositional computation of semantic values. So this is the hypothesis we want to investigate. Now, the overview of the talk, we will first review the relevant data and the proposed analysis and see in what sense they rely on this hypothesis. We'll then try to propose an explanation of why deontic and epistemic would have a different free choice potential in terms of different stages of pragmatic fossilization. Then we will implement this in a dynamic semantics. I will spare you the details. I will just give you an overview of the main ingredients of the implementation and discuss an our application. Now, first, so we're looking now at these three case studies. The first concern Romanian Vroon, work by Anna Maria. So Vroon is an epistemic indefinite. You know what it is. So Benita has also talked about them. With a limited distribution. So epistemic indefinites are existential that signal ignorance on the part of the speaker. And Anna Maria observed that the Vroon occurrences are restricted to negative polarity and a subset of modal context. We will only look at what happens with Vroon under modals. Now, so as I already said, Vroon then is licensed under epistemic modals where they also convey an ignorance effect. This is illustrated in 4. But they are ungrammatical under deontics. And this is illustrated in 5. It's a roll example from Anna Maria. Now, one interesting question that Anna Maria investigates is which kind of inference is this ignorance effect that Vroon convey under epistemic models. And then, so following Alonso Valle and Benedet's Benito distinction, she distinguishes between, say, genuine free choice inference that she labeled, following terminology from Gennaro, as total variation, from a weaker modal variation inference that she labels as partial variation. So total variation is that all alternatives in the relevant domain qualify as a possible option, whereas partial variation is more than one, but not necessarily all alternatives in the relevant domain qualify as a possible option. And then, using examples like 6, Anna Maria shows that Vroon in epistemic context merely conveys partial variation effects. 6, I've just read it in English. It is possible that Irina met Vroon's friend, but it cannot be Luca. I've just seen him. Suppose Vroon would convey total variation, then such a sentence would be contradictory, but it's not. All right. Now, so in addition to this, however, Anna Maria observes that Vroon is even incompatible with situation in which total variation would hold. And she shows this with this sort of examples. So the shell game scenario, the shell game requires 3 shells or boxes and a small ball. The ball is placed under one of the shells, and then the operator quickly shuffles the shells around. In order to win, the player has to correctly identify the shell containing the ball. And then in such a scenario, the ball might be in any box, would be a correct characterization, but Vroon cannot be used here. And then Anna Maria observed that's because the context makes clear that the ball might be in any of the boxes. So it's really, Vroon is incompatible with a total variation scenario. And so then she concludes that Vroon then expresses, besides partial variation, also an anti-total variation inference. That not all alternatives in the relevant domain qualify as a possible option. So these are the data concerning Vroon. Then we come to Anna Maria's analysis, which is couched in Kierkegaard's alternative-based approach. And we all know this. Polarity items activate alternatives. Active alternatives require the application of an independently motivated operation of exactification. And difference between different items, polarity items, are accounted for in terms of variation in the type of alternatives they may activate and in the mode of exactification they employ. And now Anna Maria's proposal is that, in this, as you all know, in this framework, different types of alternatives give rise to different modal inferences. So if we start with domain alternatives, and then we apply a justification, we get to total variation effects. If we start with singleton alternatives and then we apply a justification, we get partial variation effects. So Anna Maria proposes that Varun activates a singleton domain alternatives and allows recursive justification. Now, immediately she gets as an explanation, as a result, that she can derive partial variation and anti-total variation for Varun under epistemics by applying a recursive justification to singleton alternatives and the anti-total variation in terms of competition with the genuine free choice items in Romania. This is very nice, but we still have to account why Varun is out under Deontics. And now Anna Maria seems to suggest the following explanation, even though she doesn't work it out fully explicitly, but this is more or less what she suggests. And actually, so the fact that Varun is out under Deontics can also be explained in terms of anti-total variation in the following sense, that the ban on total variation, which somehow is conveyed by Varun, would explain the ungrammaticality of example like 9 under the assumption that existential under Deontic models give rise to total variation inferences for independent reason. And so for a sentence like 9, we have a clash between the anti-total variation triggered by Varun and a total variation inference somehow triggered by the Deontic, by any existential in the scope of a Deontic. So crucial then to this explanation is that we have the total variation, say free choice inferences independently generated under Deontic models, but not under epistemic models. Otherwise, we would predict that Varun is out also under epistemic models. Second comment, this is for Gennaro and Anna Maria. It seems to me that we cannot use, so we have to derive a 9C. But it seems to me that we cannot use Fox as justification or yours to generate this Deontic free choice inference unless we assume that Varun activates different kinds of alternatives under different kinds of model. Yeah, because so under epistemic, Varun has to produce partial variation effect, so singleton alternatives. Under Deontics, it will have to produce domain alternatives too. So this is sort of a problem. Now, second case is from Luca, and I cannot pronounce his surname, so I will call him Luca. Sorry, later on you teach me how to. I'm going a bit faster here because I don't have so much time. So he looks at the concessive scalar particles, and then this star, magari, uses as a blanket term for concessive scalar particles in various languages, including Slovenian. And then there are two, these are all his observations, two main kind of environments in which magari can occur, in downward entailing context, where it's glossed with even, and under priority models, such as imperatives and so on, in which it is glossed, I think, most of the time as at least, as illustrated in 10, which is an example with an imperative. Now, crucially, this is then Luca's observation, magari is reported not to be licensed under epistemic models. There was no example, but this seems to be the data. These are the data. Now, Luca's analysis is the following. This magari spells out two operators, an even operator and an at least operator. The definition are in 11, 12 are in illustration. I somehow skip on this. Just note that the idea is that at the end, the distribution of magari then results from interaction between the inferences that these two operators produce. Now let's just look at quickly at the example. So in positive episodic environments, magari is out, is predicted to be ungrammatical because it produces contradictory presupposition. This is illustrated in 13, and the crucial presupposition is the one in 13e. And there is a contradictory presupposition. Let's just look at the case that the same prediction then follows for magari under epistemic models, and then look at 14c. This is predicted as the presupposition of even for the sentence 14a, and then you see that you have, again, a formula. So what this says is that this sentence on the left is less likely than these two sentences. But this is impossible because these two sentences asymmetrically entail this, so they cannot be more likely than. So, contradictory presupposition, therefore, magari is out under epistemics. Now, we still want to explain why magari is okay under deontics. Now, if we do nothing, we get the wrong prediction. So now this is then the idea of Luca, one of the ideas. So one of the ideas, well, maybe we could say the following. So in a deontic sentence, if embeddable free choice inferences are generated, then no contradictory presupposition is produced, and magari is predicted to be grammatical. Now here, this is now the new presupposition. Now we have the sentence plus the free choice inferences, assumed to be part of the meaning of the sentence, so incorporated. And again, so here, sentence plus the free choice inference, sentence and free choice inference. And now, so this presupposition is not contradictory anymore because this does not entail this any longer because there is this new bit here, that the bronze medal is allowed. It is allowed to win bronze. And then Luca also observes, this is actually a quote from him, that the fact that you are allowed to win a remarkable bronze medal, this bit in the formula, and silver and gold, can be less likely that you are required to win some shiner medal. So this is a proposed solution. And again, crucial to this explanation, total variation, so inferences independently generated under deontic models, but not under epistemic models. And then Luca uses Fox exhaustification operation to generate the embeddable deontic free choice inferences, but he noticed that, again, the Fox operator overgenerates. Fox machinery is blind towards the difference between deontics and epistemics. So potentially rescue free choice inferences are derived also in the scope of epistemics. So there is a sort of a problem here that we have to explain what is going on. How much time do I have? Because maybe I skipped the third, which is my own work.
7 minutes, I should have posted the 10 minutes. So you have
Okay.
7 minutes.
Too difficult now. Let's go down very fast about the Irgendime. Everyone, I think most of you already know the data. I just want to say this. So German Irgendime, so it's an epistemic determiner with various uses. It produces ignorance effect in positive episodic sentences, context, as illustrated in 16. But you also have plain narrow scope existential meanings in downward entailing context, as illustrated in 17. We only look at what happens with ergonym under models, and then there is this observation that under an epistemic model, ergonym seems to produce partial variation inferences, whereas under a deontic model, it produces total variation inferences. So this is an observation that, so quite independently, so Angelica Port, who is a PhD student in one of my projects in Amsterdam, and Svein Laurer came up with. And so you can show this, for instance, with this scenario. The idea, quickly, this is a scenario in which such a sentence, one might be in any room in the house, would not be appropriate, because you know that he is not in the bathroom. But Irgendime can be used in such a sentence. And then conclusion, Irgendime gives rise only merely to a partial variation inference under epistemic models and not a total variation. Now, that's what happens now under deontics. This is a classical example from Kratzer and Shimoyama. Mariemus, Irgendime, and Arzt-heiraten. They observed that it is ambiguous between a wide scope ignorance interpretation represented in 20A and a narrow scope free choice interpretation represented in 20B, that diagnosis has must marry a doctor. Any doctor is a permissible option. So this is a really total variation. And then you can test this by, first of all, by stress, forcing the narrow scope interpretation, and then see that they will be incompatible with situations in which total variation would not hold. This is shown in example 21. So Irgendime under deontic gives rise to a total variation inferences. Now, what was the sort of explanation that we proposed for this? So different framework, we assume that epistemic indefinites are existential with two additional characteristics. Domain shift, they induce an obligatory domain shift, but they also express a felicity condition that must be satisfied for the indefinite to be a license. And in particular, so this existential are licensed only if such a shift, so such a domain shift they express is for a reason. And then in such a framework, the differences between different epistemic indefinites was captured in terms of the different kinds of domain shift that they could induce. And our proposal for German Irgendain was that Irgendain was able to shift the domain in two different ways. Either it could shift a method of identification, what we call the conceptual cover shift, or it could widen the domain. Actually, for this talk, only the domain widening, the standard one that you all are familiar with, is relevant. And then the felicity condition for Irgendain that we proposed were that, okay, conceptual cover shift were justified only if otherwise a speaker would not have been able to identify the witness of the existential claim, and the domain widening is justified only if it does not create a weaker statement. This is pretty standard. And then these were our prediction for the implementation. In terms of conceptual cover shift, we were able to produce the epistemic partial variation uses, say the ignorance reading of the indefinite. In terms of domain widening, we predicted the negative polarity uses, but we needed an extra assumption for the Deontic total variation uses of Irgendain. Actually, without this extra assumption, we predicted that Irgendain was not felicitous under Deontics. And now, what would be this extra assumption? So, going a bit back, so on this analysis, Irgendain is predicted to be felicitous only if one of its domain shift is for a reason. Now, and then there was a potential problem if we assumed a classical analysis of Deontics, that neither of the shift that we allowed, the conceptual cover shift or the domain shift, were justified. In particular, the domain widening shift was not justified because of 22, because extending the domain of an existential in the scope of a model leads to a weaker statement. But now, assume a grammar in which generates free choice inferences under Deontics. Now, extending the domain of an existential under a model does no longer lead to a weaker statement if we incorporate its free choice inferences. This is what we do here. If we incorporate free choice inferences, this is not any longer weaker than this. So, if we do it, then domain widening will be justified for Irgendain here. Irgendain predicted to be felicitous. Total variation effect would also be explained. And so again, crucial to this explanation, total variation inference is independently generated under Deontics, but not under epistemics. Now, this is our modal variability hypothesis then. So we have seen three different explanations of seemingly different sets of observation. Also explanation assuming different frameworks. They had one common assumption. Deontic and epistemic models have a different free choice potential. In particular, Deontic free choice seems to enter into the recursive computational composition of semantic values, whereas epistemic does not. So this is the hypothesis. What do we do with it? All right, now this is the plan. We will see whether we can find further evidence for this. Looking at recent experiments carried out to settle the debates between localist and globalist accounts of implicatures. We will then look at one possible, simple, actually, semantic account of this contrast, but we will dismiss it. And then we will propose an explanation, speculative explanation, here is the speculative part, in terms of pragmatic fossilization. We will implement then the whole thing in a dynamic semantics, and we'll look at quickly at some applications. Now, further evidence. Now here, so Kemla did recently some experiments to settle the debates between globalist and localist accounts of implicatures. And then he observed, so showed actually, that free choice inferences associated with disjunction under the Deontic model can take scope under universal quantifier. These are the so-called universal free choice example, illustrated in 24. So if you say, all of the boys may go to the beach or to the cinema, people normally conclude, all of the boys may go to the beach and all of the boys may go to the cinema. So then we have the free choice inference embedded under universal quantifier. So this evidence against globalist account of implicatures, if a free choice is an implicature. Now, but then Bart Hurt and colleagues later on said, well, actually, we don't have this universal free choice for all sorts of models. In particular, look at epistemic models. Universal free choice does not seem to arise as readily for epistemic models. This is the example from, I think this is from Thiel. According to the professor, every research question might be answered by a survey or an experiment. Now, people here are much less readily to conclude, according to the professor, every research question might be answered by a survey, and according to the professor, every research question might be answered by an experiment. And this is then normally taken, so Bart Hurt took it as an evidence against localist approach. Now, if we look at these two examples, there is one way, simple way, to somehow explain both data, 24 and 25, which would be the following. We could assume that there is a formal, a sortal difference between deontics and epistemics. And then we could say, well, look, deontic free choice inference is not pragmatic. It's just semantic entailment. That's the reason why I call this a semantic account of the modal variability hypothesis. Whereas epistemic free choice inference is just a well-behaved pragmatic. And notice that this semantic solution is compatible with the globalist accounts. So we don't need local implicature. Those are all entailment. This would be the solution. But okay, there are two problems, at least, for this account. At least. There are more, probably more. First is an empirical problem is that, well, if we assume that the deontic free choice entailments, the deontic free choice is an entailment, we will predict deontic free choice entailments for all indefinites, so also for unmarked indefinites like someone, so you would say John may marry someone, and then you predict immediately a free choice entailment. You don't really want this. Now, in alternative Bayes accounts, like Gennaro's, there is a partial solution to this, because we could say, so in these accounts, we distinguish between indefinites that generate alternatives and indefinites that do not generate alternatives. And then we can say deontic free choice entailments are produced only for alternative-inducing indefinites, and say, well, someone is not alternative-inducing. This is somehow, and I've been playing with this in one paper in 2007. There is, however, a problem still, because there are a number of indefinites that seem to be alternative-inducing, and Italian un qualche seems to be such a thing, as an example of an epistemic indefinite in Italian. So it is alternative-inducing, but at the same time doesn't give rise to the deontic free choice effect. This was an example I got from Gennaro some years ago. Per aprire un pub devi avere un qualche diploma, tipo blah, blah, blah. No free choice effect here. It's just... Now, so this was the empirical problem. It overgenerates the semantic approach. We produce all these free choice things also for things we don't want. The second is a more conceptual problem. So why would it be so? This account doesn't really give an answer to the why question. It doesn't give an answer to, so why would the deontic be different from the epistemics? Now, there is, again, a partial solution, actually, in the performative analysis of deontics. And they seem to have an answer to this. So deontics free choice is an entailment because that's so in permission-giving statements. However, this performative analysis along the lines of Lewis 79, they assume that embedded free choice is confined to permission-giving sentences, but this doesn't seem to be the case, as 27 shows. So we can have, as in the past tense, and then we have a case of an embedded free choice, which is not in a sentence which is clearly not performative. So, 5 minutes. Okay, I go. Now, why? Now that's the speculation. All these problems now speculation. Why then should the model, this variability hypothesis, why should it hold? Now, the answer we want to give, adopt a diachronic perspective. And here is a quote from Grice. It may not be impossible for what starts life, so to speak, as a conversational implicature to become conventionalized. So what Grice says is, well, there are things So pragmatic inferences, conversational implicature, can become part of literal meaning after historical processes of conventionalization. And that's then also the meaning we want to give to this pragmatic fossilization. It's just yesterday's pragmatics which gradually becomes tomorrow's semantics. And now our working hypothesis is that the Deontic and epistemic free choice at different stages are both pragmatic phenomena, but at different stages of pragmatic fossilization. Now, but the question remains, why is it so that Deontic free choices more readily penetrate compositional semantics than epistemic free choice? And now our answer is that the following, because Deontic inferences are convey information of the right type, and there are two crucial characteristics of Deontic inferences versus epistemic inferences. The former are much more practically relevant and therefore frequent enough. And here there is another quote that shows that frequency and is relevant for grammaticalization. But also, Deontic inferences are persistent while epistemic inferences are not. I have one slide of the relevance of relevance, and I have to skip it. Basically shows that one example showing how contextual relevance of the inferred information is crucial for the availability of embedded free choice inferences. But now something more on persistency, because it's a less well-known concept. The idea is that the Deontic free choice inference is persistent. It survives information growth. For instance, if you have been granted the permission to kiss any girl, gaining new information will not change this fact. On the other hand, epistemic free choice inference is not persistent. After discovering who is the culprit, one stops believing that anyone might have done it. So, Deontic persistent, epistemic non-persistent. Now, our working hypothesis is that implicature may be persistent or non-persistent, but in the process of incorporating implicature in your interpretation process, this process of incorporation of implicature should not lead to a loss of information. So only persistent implicature fossilize, or in any case, more persistent implicature seems to fossilize more readily than non-persistent one. And why would that be so? So on a Grecian view, interpretation is an information accumulation process. Now, the incorporation of implicature should optimize this process. The incorporation of non-persistent implicature would be then an irrational move on this view. Now, these insights, speculative, are made tangible in a dynamic semantics. What we are going to propose, and it's in the paper, but okay, I'm not going to say much about this today, is that so we will assume different analysis of epistemics and deontics. Deontic inference will come up as relevant, so at issue, and persistent. Epistemic inference will come out as non-relevant and non-persistent. And then we will define a straightforward way, a technique of implicature incorporation, which is only suitable for relevant, persistent information. Now, I have to skip this part of the epistemic and deontic model. This actually provides, let's say something about information in dynamic semantics, why dynamic semantics is useful if we want to make a distinction between persistent, non-persistent, and relevant, non-relevant information. So in dynamic semantics, meanings are context change potential. So, and these contexts are normally defined in terms of set of possibilities, in this case, words. Now, there are two types of information that we can encode in an information state. So we can encode information point-wise at the word level, and this is typically factual information about the word. It is relevant, what is under discussion, what is at issue, and it is persistent, survives information growth. But we can also encode information globally at the level of the information state. And this then is typically discourse information. It's about the conversational context, not the word. It's not what conversation is about, it's what conversation is. And it's not persistent. It need not survive information growth. Okay, now, the idea is that now deontic information is of type 1, formalized by classical relational semantics, and epistemics information is of type 2, along the lines of well-known Feldman-Yarsin anaphoric approaches, what I have been studying during my master thesis under Gennaro supervision. And then these are the main ingredients of the implementation. The epistemic versus deontic model I already said so. Then we have a way to calculate implicature via the notion of an optimal state. And then we define the incorporation of implicature in terms of this plus I operation, which is just defined in terms of intersection. And the idea, what is crucial, is that the incorporation of non-relevant, non-persistent implicature turns out to be vacuous under this operation. And so these are then the prediction. And with this +1, we predict that in the case of deontic, the +1 operation can be applied and guarantees that the free choice inference comes out as an entailment, whereas in the case of, in the epistemic case, this is not the case. Now, one last slide. We have introduced this +I operation, which does allow the possibility to embed implicatures, to incorporate them in the compositional system. And then we know that this somehow is a local account, and this do overgenerate, so we have to constrain the applicability of this +I operation. And we do it in this way, so the integration of implicature with +1, I, comes then with a high cost, and then our proposal is that this +I never applies unless it creates a stronger, more relevant statement, or it is needed to rescue polarity items. And now, as a consequence, we get, for instance, that 35 doesn't get the wrong interpretation. Now I go to, these are all the conclusions. And I go to the, so epistemic and deontic models differ in many ways. We focus on differences in relevance and persistence, and discussed their possible link to differences in fossilization of epistemic and deontic free choice inferences. The insights were implemented in dynamic semantics, and the application was mostly in the domain of polarity items. Sorry.
This what you call the persistence of this the epistemic information, right? That was basically what you're saying. I mean, it's because it's the way you define it. It's a kind of indexical way, right? Because that's what makes it persistent. It's information about. I mean, both can be seen. Both kinds of information can be seen as information about the current state, right? And so that even pertains to the information about the epistemic information. So if you phrase that as it is consistent with what the person or the subject knows at a given point in time, that anybody could have done it or whatever, right? Well, this is persistent too, of course, right? It's just, since you make it indexical, right, and you say it's possible that, or whatever, right, well then, of course, right, by adding information, right, what used to be possible, but it's still, there's still a sense in which it's persistent. I mean, it's just the way you sort of, it's a perspective you put on the information, which you don't in the other case, right?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. So the technical point is that if we formalize epistemic models, say, in an indexical way, then they do not fossilize. But of course, we could also choose to formulate differently, so as type 1 sort of information. Then they fossilize. And then the dynamic system gives us this possibility of choice, and this is very welcome, because in the paper we show that indeed, if you are really in a situation in which the epistemic free choice is under discussion, and we show this with some examples, it is so that we are much more ready to draw, for instance, universal free choice conclusion. So point is relevant information, yes, embeddable free choice. And the idea that in the system is that, okay, but then you should formalize it differently as type 1 sort of information, so point-wise, and not in an indexical way. But whatever you formalize in an indexical way will not be possible to be incorporated via this operation that we define. Yes. Thank you for the question, because
I was wondering how strong is the sort of this ban on embeddability of the epistemic free choice, right? Because I think I already asked you at SALT, but I'll ask you again. So it seems to me that intuitively you can get that reading, right? You can say, suppose yesterday Ana Maria could have said every student might be in Victoria or Bilbao, and somebody could answer, no, Jacopo can only be in Victoria. I think if I'm doing this right? So you're rejecting the universal free choice reading here. So there is at least in few cases, you can, maybe there is a contrast, but you can get this reading. So I was wondering whether this is okay in your...
No, okay, so in a way it relates to my answer to Ada's question. The idea is that, so in the paper we also recognize that there are cases of epistemic universal free choice. In this framework we will have then to claim, okay, then these are cases in which then the epistemic information is at issue. Therefore, we would have to formalize the epistemic information point-wise, and therefore we can get them. So, but this is what the formalism offers us. It's flexible enough. But okay, the link is between at issue and the possibility of embeddable free choice. If that's correct, so this is something that we should then investigate in maybe one experiment, and somehow it seems, yeah, then this should work. So I'm not negating that epistemic universal free choice exists. It exists, but with some connotation. So the claim is we need special context in which it is indeed at issue what is the epistemic information that we are sharing.
We have time for one quick question and one quick answer.
Yeah, so you saw what I meant, but the flood of formula that unavoidably comes when Maria talks. The idea about persistency is very intriguing, and I'll think about it. As it's very much to sort of share the view that what is going on in much of the polarity system is a form of grammatization of sorts. Now, the question is how to exactly constrain that, right? And what are the moves? And one very simple and very powerful way of thinking about it is that there is a set of grammatically determined alternatives, and normally that set can be contextually pruned. And so you can get rid of certain effects, say with ordinary indefinites. And the only switch that you're allowed to trip to move into the polarity domain is that this kind of contextual pruning is disallowed. So there is a restrictive theory of grammaticization. And the imploration is to try to aspire for something that has a similar structure, where the, grammaticization is not just writing arbitrary rules, but follows a narrowly constrained pattern. Now, the specific question, however, is along the lines you dismiss a kind of a view that's, I wonder whether that is happening too fast. My understanding of say, proposals such as Ana Maria's is that, in essence, there are two two independent phenomena going on, right? So on the one hand, there are items that may or may not have obligatorily active, unprunable alternatives. And on the other hand, there are requirements that come from the model that may or may not be sensitive to these alternatives. Thus, in particular, a simple take, however implemented, is that deontics, when deontics encounter obligatorily active alternatives, they require some sort of obligatory free choice construal of those alternatives, sort of along the lines of the way you treat imperatives. And epistemics do not. And so you obviously are trying to get rid of this way of looking at things, and I want to understand exactly why. So this is the empirical side of the question.
I totally understand that. So yeah, okay. At the end, so you are totally right. There are two independent things. So on one side, these are the indefinite with their alternatives, and then there is the contrast between epistemic and deontic. And then your question: why can't we just buy the story of the alternative base and then just add some story about the difference between epistemic and deontics? And this is what I've been trying to do in the paper, actually. And this is summarized here. It's okay. So this was the, yeah. I tried to do it, but then I got a problem. But I want to hear from you too what you think about it. So what I tried. So let's take Anna Maria's analysis, yours analysis, and then we just add my analysis of modals that I had in the 2007 paper, but only for deontic. So say deontic produce free choice entailment, epistemic don't. And forget about the why question, just take that. Now I had this problem with epistemic indefinites different from Varun, which are okay under deontic but don't give rise to free choice. So this is the empirical problem in 26. So for Varun, we want to generate total variation. So then we have a clash with anti-total variation, and we predict that Varun is out under deontics. But for other items like algun or like unqualque, we want to generate that they are okay under deontics, but still they don't give rise to total variation. So this was the empirical problem. I didn't know how to do that, because unqualque then had to produce singleton alternatives, I thought, because you want to derive a partial variation under epistemics, but also partial variation under deontic. So how to do that? I didn't know. So that's to you. If you can come with a solution, I'm really eager to. I really tried. So
it's going to be in the coffee break.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but that was the crucial problem. 26. Those sort of examples. Yeah.
Okay, so we are a little late, but I think
I'm
we have
sorry.
to convene at 12:05.